Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges, and this is ATN Prime, broadcasting to you from our studios here in Harare, Zimbabwe. Ahead on The Mint today. Now, we're all aware, of course, about the introduction of the ZiG and, of course, the attendant fact that it'll be backed up by reserves, mainly of a basket of special commodities, and one of them, of course, is gold. The ZiG price, of course, will fluctuate up and down depending on the price of gold, and the central bank says that they can actually change that basket of currencies if gold is either depreciating or appreciating. It's up to them. But there is one area which is quite interesting, which we want to look at on The Mint today, and that is accounting. Now, a lot of you out there running businesses or policy makers will obviously be sitting in your offices thinking, well, now ZiG is out. How do we account for it? What do we have to look for? What are the issues that matter to us? How do we look at historical data? What about going forward? What is the currency we're going to use? Yep. And is it going to be IFRS? Is it going to be the law? These are some of the issues that matter when it comes to the accounting profession. Now, for the past few decades, as you know, Zimbabwe has seen various currency challenges, and this as a result of hyperinflation, lack of foreign currency liquidity, and of course, a depreciating exchange rate. And we've also seen a number of currency changes. I think we've had about 4 over the last 10 years. So today we're going to explore with experts in studio how accountants are adapting to ZiG. What should they do, if anything? Should they do something now? What about going forward? What about historical data? Don't go away. The Mint. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges, and this is ATN Prime. Now, for the past decade, Zimbabweans have seen various currency challenges as a result of hyperinflation and lack of foreign currency liquidity or availability. In 2009, the Zimbabwe dollar was demonetized due to the 2006 to 2008 severe hyperinflation and was replaced, of course, by a multi-currency regime. Let's fast forward to 2016. The government of Zimbabwe introduced and pegged the bond notes alongside the US dollar at 1-to-1. In 2019, the Zimbabwe dollar replaced the bond note, and at that time, inflation was already creeping up on the legal tender. And of course, as you know, the 1-to-1 was actually scrapped eventually by the government. The multi-currency regime was reintroduced in March 2020, and last year was extended to 2030. In 2024, announcing the monetary policy statement, the new governor, John Mushayavanu, introduced the ZiG, or Zimbabwe Gold. In all of these changes, one particular group that feels the impact most, I believe, could be accountants. Today on The Mint, I'm joined by accounting experts to unpack the impact of currency changes and how they're navigating these changes, principally, of course, the ZiG. In studio with me, Institute of Chartered Accountants, ICAS, Technical Director Owen Mavengere, and Docere Holdings Chief Executive, and also the founder of CAA. He's also a chartered accountant in his own right, Commissioner Anesu Daka. Gentlemen, welcome to The Mint.
Thank you, Andy.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritties of what actually to do, which I'm also very interested to find out from you experts. Now, I will mention, of course, please, that here on The Mint, the experts, they have their views, but if you are an accountant, a finance director, a chief financial officer, of course you're the people that you go to for advice. So please continue doing that, because this is a fluid situation. And of course, as many people putting in their thoughts and what they do and their experiences will obviously make the whole profession accountable and start doing the right thing. Oh, and before we get into the ZiG and the accounting principles of it, I always say when we look at the accounting profession, I always say it suffers from a brain drain. It's a critical profession. It's changing, of course, over time because, as you said before the show, AI is taking over. Just plug things in and boom, it comes out, Excel spreadsheets. But just give me an overview from ICAS's perspective of the accountancy profession in Zimbabwe, especially looking at this new currency, the ZiG.
Thank you so much, Andy. If I could use 2 words, it would be fun times.
I like that.
Right. So I think the profession is at a very critical point in time right now. In fact, I'll start right from the top. Brain drain. For example, our institute, more than 50% of our members are out there. These are critical skills that we've trained, and they've left the country. We've got the currency changes, and we've got the public sector as well. adopting international public sector accounting standards, all of that falls on us. And before the introduction of the ZiG, we had the hyperinflation. And you know what people are saying about those figures.
And of course, the different exchange rates.
We'll
talk about that later.
But, yeah. And so on. But we are coming out of a situation where we've got the hyperinflation, which triggers hyperinflationary accounting, which is very confusing for most.
It's very confusing.
And it then does away with one of the primary purposes of financial reporting, which is to communicate a message. And if you've got these figures which no one understands, then you essentially are not talking to anyone.
Now, I mean, if I look at ICAS, okay, and this is important for everyone to understand, you've got the public and private sector. And I know that you used to have your what I call gold standard chartered accountants course. So if you pass that, you can literally still work anywhere in the world. But because of the fact that public sector's in there, local authorities are in there, and so forth, you've actually come up with new training courses to cater for those sort of people in those sort of institutions. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right, thank you so much, Andy. Yeah, so I think the chartered accountancy brand is tried and tested, more than 100 years old. So we simply just borrowed from that experience, and we created what we're calling the public sector professional accountant, which is a professional that's trained on two pillars, education and the academics. Right? You know, my colleague here is one of the luminaries in terms of education in the country. So we've got the education and the practical training, you know, essentially training under the master. So now these experts in the public sector, they will be going through these training programs, and they will be essentially almost at the same level as a chartered accountant, but just specialists in the public sector, so that we can have the public sector performing at the highest level, similar to what you see in your listed entities and the likes.
And also one important thing, of course, is government, particularly government or the public sector, all talking and using the same accounting principles, the same accounting rules, because right now that isn't the case across everybody. So if local authorities and government departments and ministries and so forth all use and talk to each other in the same language, that really does help fiscally, not just the government of Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe in general.
Zimbabweans in general will benefit. Now you can compare. You could be able to pick up City of Harare accounts and compare them to Econet wireless, you know, if you want to. And you can compare within industries, across industries, and even the quality of the decisions that those charged with governance have to make. Even if it's a councillor of a local authority, they can have a report that's meaningful, understand it, make the correct decisions, get the correct understanding of where the public funds are going, how they're being utilized.
Now, Anesu, you obviously have two organizations. I want to refer to CAA and, of course, TAS, which is your training arm. And when you said you're the academic, in fact, you're the one on the ground, I suppose, who has a training school that actually trains accountants in some of these things. What is your view about the state of the accounting profession? You know, we'll get into the ZiG now, but what is your view, similar to what I asked Owen?
First of all, I'd like to say, one may look at accounting and say, what about it in terms of ZiG or this discussion? But accounting is the epitome of transparency and accountability. Because after a business is run, it needs to put the figures there. One of the key things that it brings out is the stewardship of management. How have they performed? Have they created value for the users? And it is therein where we assess protecting the public interest, because if you look at the public sector, we, the public here, are the users, and we've contributed, we've paid taxes. So we need to start looking at the affairs and say, are they wasteful? Are they creating value? Would they be able to provide that
are they
public
a true
service?
Snapshot of what I'm looking at?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I've put shares in a listed company, is there value have been created? So it therefore means that all these things that has happened needs to eventually be having an accountant to be able to distill it and say it makes sense. And definitely, as pointed out, there's been a brain drain in terms of attracting talent. But besides that, it's also the challenges within the reporting and some of these, we could call it, say, the policies and so forth, that some people have said, okay, I may not be able to operate in this environment, and they've chosen to do it elsewhere. Yeah.
But I mean, IFRS, I mean, this is why we have things like IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, because once we have a standard that everybody accepts, everybody follows, it makes things so much easier. Right, guys, why we are here. We're here, of course, to talk about ZiG and what that means for the accounting profession. So, Anesu, let's start with you. Okay. So, on the 5th of April, there I am. I'm a CFO. I'm a finance manager. I'm an accountant sitting in some office, whether it be public or private sector. I could even be in Mavengere sitting in my room. Now, looking backwards, let's go backwards first. We'll worry about forwards. Let's worry about what am I supposed to do? What are the issues I must look for or look at going backwards from now, from the 5th of April, going backwards possibly to the beginning of the year, or even earlier, depending on when your financial year started as a business?
So thank you for that. So when we looked at this, because like you said, we are on the ground, we're already inundated with a lot of requests before the 5th in terms of assessments of functional currency. So business already feeling, but we wouldn't say 5 April, that's where everything happened and was pronounced. Things had started happening. So when you look at the beginning, the coming of the gold coin, the coming of the digital token, it was also talking to the deterioration that was happening on the ZW, which means the ZIM dollar, right? And when you look at the pronouncements, that also says currently the USD is about 80%, if you look at 2 billion. And on 5 April, the governor said about 90 million US dollars is the only amount worth of the local currency.
Yep.
So if you take that 90 compared to 2 billion, which means most of the business is happening in US dollars, and a lot of entities were already starting to say, which is what currency should we be reporting in?
Exactly. So that's the key. That's the first question.
That's the first question.
So what currency should we be reporting in? US dollars, ZiG, or ZIM? In fact, US dollar or ZIM in those days, going backwards.
Yes. So on the 5th, the trigger that you then find is an entity is then saying, okay, there is now a new currency. Does that mean, I'm sure for anyone who is sitting there saying, so does that mean that I'm now reporting in this currency? And then what you then find is international best practice, I'll put it easily, or international financial reporting standards, which is international best practices, then says, no, you need to look at what is happening in your business. How are you transacting? What currency are you receiving as far as cash is concerned for yourselves? What are you spending? And that should be your functional currency. So you'd find that many businesses were already doing this assessment, which is also leading to the US dollar for some, because I'm sure, as you can see, 90 million out of about 2 billion.
A lot of people are using the US dollar predominantly.
Yes. So whereas there are some businesses that were still predominantly ZIM dollars. So what it then means is at 5 April, if you had not already found your functional currency, which is like for those that have seen the US dollars. So for those that have seen the
Nothing would have changed. You'd still have to find it.
Exactly. So if you had seen the US dollar in terms of that, you then continue with your US dollar. But if you were still on the fence and you had the ZIM dollar being the most dominant one in terms of your sales and your expenditure, then it therefore means that you are now converting to the ZiG. But that assessment is still very crucial.
I know we'll continue looking at going backwards, but Owen, I mean, this is an interesting point that Anesu is raising there, because you would hope that there would be guidance to the accounting profession. You would hope that the regulatory authorities, PAAB, would say, right, this is what we propose or we expect. Because all you're going to get at the end of the year then is you're going to get qualified audits all the time. If the auditor doesn't think that your currency is a ZIM dollar and the things of the US, I mean, that confusion I don't think needs to be there, does it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. I think you're absolutely right in that. So our regulator, the PAAB, will be obviously issuing guidance. But if you look at our structure, it has entities such as ourselves as the public accountancy organizations on the ground. So what we have actually done immediately is we've already gone to the market. We've written a paper which is open for discussion, right? It's not a policy, it's just a little discussion paper where we're getting the views of the public in terms of what they're seeing, these assessments that Anesu has just mentioned, because if you ask me again, similarly, most of the entities' functional currency is actually the US dollar because of that, the fact that even in the MPS it says more than 80% is
and of course
in
now
US
if you're on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, you're allowed to use the US dollar as well.
They are allowed to. Obviously, that trend will shift as we head to 2030, but at this moment, most entities will have the functional currency of the US dollar. So we've got that discussion paper, which we will then, escalate all the way to PAAB, and then we can have some sort of guidance.
So what you're asking for is accountants, finance directors, whoever, go onto your website, icas.co.zw.
org.zw.
ORG. So icas.org.zw. Have a look at the paper, and if you have any comments or views or even experiences, share them, because at the end of the day, this is about an industry looking to get cohesion amongst every member. Anesu, now, okay, so we talked about, first of all, functional currency as number one. Okay, happy days. I'm sitting here, my year started in January the 1st. I was in Zim dollar, I was in US dollar, I'm now in ZiG, right? What am I supposed to do? I'm sitting as an accountant. Am I supposed to suddenly change everything back to ZiG? Or what? You tell me, you're the expert, I'm not. Go on.
So probably we might be throwing terminologies that many people may not understand.
Yeah.
Functional currency. So functional currency simply means the most dominant money or currency that you are using in your business. And you see it in the receipts that you get for your sales, or for, if it's public sector, for the taxes, as well as what you are spending, the money, the color of the money that you are spending.
Right.
That's what we call functional currency. And an entity has no choice. You don't choose.
It's based on your books and how you transact.
It's also not, what do you call it, legislated.
Yes.
So there's no law that then says this is the one that you should use. It is based on fact. We call it substance over legal form.
Okay.
So it's based on fact, what is actually presented to you. So if you are ZW, which means that's the fact, that is the currency that you are dealing with. And accordingly, then you have to say, I need to move to ZiG, because that's
your
next
functional
domestic
currency, basically.
That's your functional currency, right? And to do that, there are two ways to look at it and to think about it. That's on the date of change. But before let's just step back a little bit.
Please. Before
we look at the translation, we need to choose the date.
Okay, so the 5th may not be the date. That's just the date that someone spoke. Yeah.
The 5th may not be, because we are saying some that already had been assessing and they've seen US dollars, they already did it before. But even if the 5th is, and the 5th may not be comfortable, or what do you call it, the most convenient, you are still allowed to choose a convenient. Because let's say if you choose the 5th, you've got 3 months and 5 days
prior
in ZW.
Yeah.
Then you have got about
9 months or
9 months
in ZiG.
And then you want to present to users and the
shareholders, your public, your who.
And you want to present, and you are saying, this is my income statement, ZW, and so the standard does allow to find an effective, but it's not a science and exact science.
So you could start from 1 January, no problem.
You could start from 1 January.
If that was when your year started, and then start everything from then,
and then have a year, or to start from there. Because when they change, then that as it happens, it says you start it prospectively. Means if you say 5 April, you are showing your financial statements from 5 April going forward.
Right.
It therefore means that the 3 months in ZW, if you can't change them to ZiG, I'm sure they will be exchanging the challenges and so forth. If you can't change them, you then have to package them in the disclosure notes and say the currency changed on this date. However, I had this portion of the year that had happened in this currency, and you then show it as a disclosure, and you only then show the 9 months, because that's what
I know we may be using a few words here that you may not know, disclosures and so forth. Those of you who know accounting and know how to read balance sheets and statements of accounts, but to all your accountants, CFOs, CEOs, in fact, pretty much anyone who's sitting in a business, they pretty much will probably know exactly what my guests are talking about. Owen, you know, one of the issues that came out, okay, was this issue of, and this is another issue, about the issue of hyperinflation and how that is going to be treated. Because when I say currently, before ZiG, right, we were in a hyperinflation accounting, agreed. Now ZiG has come along, right, yet Yeah, we don't know. So maybe explain to us, to those out there, hyperinflation accounting, and what does it apply to ZiG? How are you going to look at it as the accounting profession?
Okay, thank you so much, Andy. So certainly, yes, the ZWL was hyperinflationary. I think I touched on it right at the start, and we all know how confusing those numbers are. So as a profession, we are really excited about the ZiG because it's an opportunity for us to perhaps restart. And the ZiG being a new currency, for now, there are no indicators of it being hyperinflationary. Obviously, we will continue to assess. We have to do all those assessments. Again, this is in the standards. They tell you what to look out for. So there are figures in terms of if inflation reaches a certain level, which is plus or minus 26% per annum, or if if the populace continue to keep their monies in a different currency and the likes.
Also, I must stress, it isn't you who decides this hyperinflation. This is actually coming from a regulator, PAB, that makes a statement and says we're now at hyperinflation. That way, they then can talk to the whole industry. It isn't ICAS or anybody else. It comes from the regulator.
So preferably the regulator should say, because the standard says because it's a currency which is used essentially by everyone. You can't say as an individual, I'm hyperinflationary. It's the entire currency, the entire market, the entire economy. So it has to come from the regulator or some other authority who can then say for this currency and as an entire market and an entire economy, we are now in hyperinflation.
Okay, so basically it's a wait and see. So in other words, you're not saying that yes, ZiG is now hyperinflation. It isn't. We're saying we don't know actually. Let's analyze it and evaluate it, and then we'll make a determination as an industry, not as ICAS, not as Anesu and at KAA, but as an industry, we'll make a determination. Anesu, okay, so now let's finish going backwards. So one of the issues, of course, which was a big issue, and it probably may still be, is the exchange rate. And I say this because, of course, one of the problems before the ZiG came in was still the parallel market exchange rate and the official exchange rate. And we seem to be still in a similar situation today as we were before. We have a willing buyer, willing seller interbank exchange rate, okay, which probably sits around 13.5, okay? But we now have a parallel market rate, which is sitting at between 18 and 21 ZiG to 1 US. So does this create the same exchange rate problems to accountants as it did before?
So I think I'll comment to that as well as on the hyperinflation, because it's connected. Our issue of exchange rate. So you would find that we are very cognizant that when the ZIM dollar came through, it was very low to a 2.5 on a pronouncement, and quickly went up. By end of year, it was about 1920 by end of year, and then was actually declared hyperinflation 1 July, while the currency came on the 24th, which is 6 days in terms of difference. But where we were right now was a little bit beyond what we call hyperinflation, and we're already starting to make that assessment. It's called severe hyperinflation.
Wow, there's more than hyperinflation.
So there is more than hyperinflation. Whoa. There's a point of hyperinflation
where it's now severe.
Where it's now severe.
Sheesh, is it, right? I hope there's nothing above severe. That would be like, whoa.
So it happened. Remember, I say we've got some of these things have happened in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, it did happen.
We went outside.
Yeah, like $1 trillion hyperinflation.
We came to a point where you couldn't report. It doesn't matter your energy.
Yeah, it made no difference.
You couldn't report, and we're starting to come close to that. If you look at how the rate was moving, yes, and we're then saying on the day, one could then go on and say, if I'm translating, if I've got the numbers and the exchange rate, I can translate. But the issue of the exchange rate, if it's willing buyer, willing seller, and allowed by the market, which is the willing buyers and willing sellers, to participate, we look at what we call the principal market. Where is the exchange rate mostly traded? And if those people are trading it and are coming up with a price, and it's not a fixed, if it's not a price that's most influenced by the central bank, then it would actually
But that gives a wide range, doesn't it? I mean, it gives you a range from 13.5 up to 21, depending on what your business is transacting at or trading at, whether you're buying from your suppliers, whether you're producing to sell. I mean, that creates still a bit more confusion, which we shouldn't really have.
But I say, if you go to South Africa right now, we would say probably there's that, if you go into any bank, there is a small spread, I would say, a difference, in terms of each bank may not be at the same level.
No, but the spread isn't 100% like in Zimbabwe. Exactly. It's just a few pips, isn't it?
But the issue is, we need to. I mean, let's look at gold. Let's look at diamond or platinum. Who decides the price?
It's traded in the market.
No, it's not us,
No, it's
the
market.
producers. It's the consumers, those that buy and use it. So that's what the willing buyer, willing seller is saying, to say those that are using, that needs the currency, which is the market, decides the price.
Right.
If the price is decided from the regulators, it becomes a challenge because they are not the ones.
So what you want is a fixed price. You want a fixed price that's fixed by the market that everybody can look as a benchmark price that isn't coming from the central bank
fixed.
or I'm saying
free
it's
floating.
free, but it's a free float. When I say fixed, sorry, I'm talking now as a treasurer. When I say fixed, what happens is, of course, at the end of the day, they amalgamate everything and they give you a price.
Exactly.
But it's based on trading.
It's based on
right, now
trading.
we only have 5 minutes left, and I now want to go forward. So here I am. I've decided what currency I want. I want ZiG, for example. I want US dollars. So effectively now, it's just normal accounting practices. I think this is what people. I think this is why a lot of people get confused about these issues. But actually, it's quite simple because you've done it before, right? It's just now just changing everything you're doing now to ZiG because that's what the transactional currency is. US dollars okay because that's always been there anyway, right? But nothing fundamentally changes. What changes now, I suppose, is because it's happening in April.
Yes.
That's what's making it a little bit more confusing because you have 3 months or even 6 months before. I think that is the issue. And is that really the bottom line?
Yes, absolutely. And so essentially now, once you've done your functional currency assessment, you move forward. But then the beauty of functional currency in the US is it will help resolve a lot of things, especially like your hyperinflation. Because remember, so functional currency is what happens behind the scenes.
Yep.
There's what we also call the presentation currency,
Right.
which I also need to talk about.
Okay, very quickly. You've got like 2 minutes. That's why I say I've given you 15. I thought let me take the whole show.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Let's talk
like
about
I
it
say,
quickly.
the functional currency, you don't even choose it.
No,
it's
that's
a
based on
function.
your
So I'm
performance.
guessing if
Yeah.
you're in Bainbridge or in Blawa, it could be the rand, right?
What about the presenting currency?
But then the presentation currency is the one that you select. So I think being in Zimbabwe, for regulators, your ZSEs, your RBZ, your IPEC, they can actually, this is something that we're going to discuss with them. They can actually just request that entities also present in local currency. So you could have your USD as a functional currency.
Right.
That's no one's fault. It's essentially just conditions.
This gives you guys a lot of work because I see a lot of accountants are doing 2 sets of books. One in hyperinflation, inflation-adjusted Zim dollars or ZiG, and then of course US dollars. Right, look, we're going to wrap up. Guys, listen, obviously there's a lot to discuss here. There's a lot more that the experts can give you. Please go to whoever you're speaking to in terms of tax advice, in terms of accounting advice. There's ICAS is there to talk to, Anesu, Daka, of course, at CAA and TAS, and I'm sure there's other experts out there who you can speak to. Get advice, understand what's going on, talk to each other. I think the more you speak to each other as a profession, if I'm not wrong, gentlemen, the more you come up with a common goal, and that's what you want, a common goal. Very quickly, future of the accounting profession. It's no longer me sitting looking at books, is it? I mean, things have changed now.
Things have changed, Andy. In fact, as a profession, right, I don't know how much time I have,
literally
but I
got
can
30
talk for
seconds,
an hour about this.
Yeah.
So, technology is here. Things have changed. Gone are the days of bean counters. We aren't bean counters anymore.
No,
right?
That's why I was saying I could never do a bean counter job, even though I do it.
But now the future of the profession is, first, the only thing that hasn't changed, and that will never change, is ethics and integrity.
Of course.
That is the foundation, non-negotiable.
Of course.
But you're looking at people with digital acumen, relational acumen, decision-making
Strategic
acumen, strategy, and influencer, essentially. Someone who can understand financial and non-financial information to make decisions.
In fact, I can say that most large companies now are run by chartered accountants. Isn't that a fact? And that shows you something. Right, anyway, gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the Mint this afternoon. I'd like to thank Anesu, Daka from CAA and TAS, and of course, Owen, Mavengere from ICAS. Gentlemen, as usual, it's such a pleasure having you here, and I'm sure we'll continue these discussions going forward. Well, that's it for the Mint today. I'd like you to all to have a great time, and I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.
Ngati makore makumi manani na iwe Zimbabwe chivakwa